Well, welcome to the Forging Manufacturing Podcast, Jim. I can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me in.
Yeah, really excited to be speaking with you. And I know today's topics are super timely. Everyone loves a top 10 list. You've actually gone ahead and created three. Looking forward to actually diving deep into this with you.
Yeah, what I've discovered, I've been a futurist for 25 years and just, crazy list of clients like NASA and Disney and the PGA. And what I'm discovering is people are starting to return to thinking about the future. I mean, we're getting obviously out to the other side of this thing. And what I'm discovering is people are sort of thinking, okay, well, what were we talking about before the pandemic in our industry? How did the pandemic change our industry? And what does that mean going forward? And so I've done a lot of thinking about what is going on in the world of manufacturing to put that into perspective.
Yeah,
I'm glad you said something about a futurist, Jim. This was the first time I've heard the title futurist. I thought maybe you could expand a little bit about where that title came from and what exactly it means.
Yeah, it's sort of, I mean, my job is to think about the future. And I found myself in a lot of very unique circumstances. Looking 2012 and 2014, NASA invited me in to talk to a bunch of astronauts and mission directors and literally rocket engineers. And sort of the theme was, we've always been the people in the business of space, NASA, but we know that is going to change and we have to challenge ourselves. What are the trends that are going to take us there? And so that was sort of pre-SpaceX and pre-privatization of space. Disney had me in for a talk on creativity, and that was around what can we expect in terms of consumer demand in the future? How will they consume media? How is our industry going to change? So really what I do is I spend a lot of time thinking about what comes next and what it really means. I mean, I do every industry. I mean, I went into do a lot of talks in the world of agriculture and do a lot of research. At one point, a fellow came up to me and said, how long have you been a farmer? So it's really just a job to help people think about what comes next. And rather than fearing what comes next, what do we do to turn it into opportunity?
Wow. Well, I'd say no need to delay. I'm too excited. Let's just get into it. Do we want to go into what we were talking about in manufacturing innovation pre-COVID?
Yeah, so I'm just going to jump back, into my studio here for a bit. And for those who are listening by audio, what you would see right here is this awesome stage set. I mean, the pandemic hit and I wasn't on a stage anymore in Las Vegas. So I built my own virtually in a basement. And look, here's what I was doing just before the pandemic. The World Bank had me over to Marrakesh, Morocco, late 2019 for a talk on the future of manufacturing in third world economies. I mean, I was doing a lot of very niche oriented topics like that. And I've gone into a tremendous number of manufacturing conferences. I've filmed a whole bunch of material where I'm talking about robotics and 3D printing, additive, industrial, Internet of Things, really putting in perspective for folks the trends that are going to change their future. And what I was talking about, if we go through that list, if we sort of consider what was I identifying for the World Bank and for robotics companies and for big manufacturing association conferences, was a whole laundry list of the key trends. And your audience, everybody's going to be very familiar with these. The key thing is these trends were unfolding at a very fast pace. I mean, my tagline is the future belongs to those who are fast. So what were we talking about pre-COVID? Rapid acceleration of new methodologies in the plant, in the factory, the process. We were seeing the continued emergence of all kinds of methodologies, new ways of doing things, ways to challenge what we were doing in process. Obviously, additive in 3D. I had some really unique situations along the way. For example, there's a company based out of St. Louis, Amstead Rail, that they manufacture rail bogies, the undercarriage rail cars. And they're having to compete with, lower cost offshore Chinese suppliers. They know that cost reduction is critical to their future. So, we had a good leadership discussion. That was a lot of the events I do are senior leadership, CEO level events, talking about what's going on with 3D. What can we expect? Where is that trend going to take us in the future? How soon might it become real? A lot of us talking about IIoT, industrial Internet of Things in the factory. I was with one organization, and they brought in 500 engineers to talk about what do we get. We get better visibility, better management of our manufacturing process. We get better insight into where things are going wrong. I mean, this is a trend that had major legs pre-COVID. One of the most exciting trends I think that was out there was rapid product prototyping and iterative design. It used to be we design a product, we'd bring it to market, we'd sell it. Well, what we've seen with the acceleration of methodology and all these trends is we can now design a product, we can test it, we can put it out to our customers, we can redesign it. The whole iterative design process was beginning to take over the world of manufacturing. And a lot of that was driven by crowdfunding, crowdsourcing. I mean, Kickstarter, things like this. I think edge thinking sort of became the incubator for a lot of very innovative product design, because what people were doing, smaller sized organizations could put an idea out there. They could get the reaction of folks. They could have this, again, iterative design process going back and forth. So I think we were seeing a lot of influence on product design and conceptual thinking of what could we manufacture as a result of what was occurring with crowdfunding. This led to a really unique situation, with the rapid emergence of a lot of the new competitors. And I think one of the most fascinating impacts of this was, organizations that were embedding intelligence into their products were suddenly competing with mainstream manufacturers. So if you think of someone like Ecobee or the Nest thermostat, if you're a Lennox Furnaces and you're selling thermostats, you're Honeywell, you're selling thermostats. Whoa, we've got these new competitors who are challenging the very essence of the product we are selling. Skills issues. I mean, I spoke at so many manufacturing conferences where the big issue is skills. I was with a company called Genesis Systems. They're a robotics manufacturer in Davenport, Iowa. And they brought me in for a dinner talk. And it was actually on the factory floor. It was a really, really cool set, talking to a few hundred manufacturing executives. And I put up this quote that, from a machinist who observed the typical machinist today, it's almost as if they need to be able to do trigonometry in their heads to deal with the complexity of the process. The skills issue is massive. We know that. We've been talking about that for years. I don't think we've really fixed it. New material science. Just 5 years ago, I was with the annual Powder Met conference in Boston and talking about the rapid emergence of new materials. You think about automotive, the whole trend towards lightening of the vehicle, aluminum. I can never say that word correctly. The new materials which let us change what we manufacture or decrease the weight of what we manufacture. I mean, there's been a flood of new material science, the whole process to make devices intelligent, Internet of Things embedded in products. We change the very essence of the product once we embed connectivity. Obviously Amazon. How do we change our supply chain to deal with the fact that so much more of what we're doing is going direct to consumer, and we're witnessing new competitors. And, there was just a flood of stuff that we were talking about pre-pandemic in the world of manufacturing. And this is where associations and manufacturing companies and, organizations like the World Bank were asking me as a futurist, what do we need to do about this stuff? And what are these trends? And what are they going to need? And how do we align those? And most important, how do we, turn them from being a threat into an opportunity?
Yeah. And, going back to your tagline, right? The future belongs to those who are fast, right? And I know you've spent a career, around some of the largest manufacturers. I think a lot of times we focus on and talk about some of the largest manufacturers in the world. And a lot of what you touched on applies to anybody, applies to any company, not just a manufacturer necessarily, but also to those that are small, those that, and I think this still holds true, that those that are smaller are now able to compete at different levels than they may have been able to in the past with the giants in that industry. Do you see that changing? Do you see that accelerating? Can you talk to that at all?
It's a huge issue. Look, I actually built a very healthy business going into senior leadership meetings talking about agile, and not agile software development, but leadership agility. And I'll give you some examples. New York Life, Mercedes-Benz, Boehringer Ingelheim, which is a pharmaceutical company, and a few others brought me in for CEO level sessions where the key theme was our world is changing fast. We've got to change faster. We've got to develop a new leadership agility to move faster. And I mean, Mercedes-Benz is the perfect example. Cars are becoming computers. Tesla is setting the pace. It's a big iPhone on wheels. And, an organization like Mercedes, Chrysler, Ford, they don't have that high-tech culture. They don't have that Silicon Valley mentality. And so they have been used to moving and evolving at a rather slow pace. Well, look, I mean, your car dashboard from 2016 is irrelevant and olden from the olden days by 2018 and, ancient by the year 2020. So they know they had to accelerate their style, their workforce, the flexibility, agility. These sort of became keywords pre-pandemic. And yeah, they did know that a lot of the competition was coming from smaller, more nimble, agile startups. It's a very, very unique world. And so a huge amount of business around that theme of speed. The future belongs to those who are fast. And look, my closing tagline on stage was think big, start small, scale fast. And that actually became, the title of a book. And that's where I noticed everybody was writing that down going, yeah, that's it. That's the formula that we need for success.
Yeah. And what I found, pre-COVID was these customers I was working with were all trying to sprint. They just didn't know where to sprint to or what technologies to tackle next. I think it's going to be interesting coming out of this COVID era to see how this pans out.
Yeah, that's a very real issue. Look, I spent a lot of time talking about what I called experiential capital, and I sort of explained, when it comes to your future, you've got to have a lot of financial capital, obviously, to invest in new assets and new methods and new technologies, but you also need a lot of experiential capital. And that's the accumulated experience you come up from doing new things. So when I was with Amstead Rail, which later expanded to Amstead, which was auto parts and other organizations, they brought me in a second time. The theme we explored was, 3D printing. We should simply just try it out. We don't know exactly where we're going with this stuff, but we know we have to make great time. So let's take on some projects to try it out. And they had a really cool thing. They had what they called the Google room. And they had 3 young manufacturing engineers. They bought them all the toys. They bought them all the 3D printers. They bought them all the IIoT devices. They bought them all the latest cool stuff. And they basically said, go forth and play with this. We don't know exactly what we're going to do with it, but we think it's important to figure it out. You as the young people need to figure this out for us. I then started going into other companies and noticed they called it the Xbox room. And the whole idea was this stuff is evolving fast. We don't know exactly what it means, but we have to figure it out. And that's all part of this issue of speed.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many 3D printers I've seen collecting dust in manufacturing companies because they just don't know what to do with it just yet.
But it's important to begin to get the expertise around it because we know it is going to be very real in the long run.
Yeah. Before we hop into the next set of 10, which is talking about, what people are talking about during the pandemic, during the COVID times. One last thing that you touched on is that skills gap. And, we know in manufacturing, especially, there's the aging workforce and the ability to change with the people that you have. And you have number one tip, the thing that you can tell any manufacturer that it's okay. We can get around this. Have you seen anything specifically work? Is there a magic button, so to speak? And how do you accomplish, tackling that issue?
I'm excited by community colleges because I think, we've seen a lot of very innovative things between manufacturing companies and community colleges that look, we need this skill. Let's go forth to a community college and they'll put together the education program to help us develop that. I think it's realizing that the skills we have today are not what are going to serve us tomorrow. And so we've got to continually enhance them, build upon them. I think, as well, there's got to be a little bit of a reality check. I think what we've seen, in the US over the last several years is there's an easy way out. All we need to do is, build some walls and put in tariffs and, things like that. And we can bring all this manufacturing back. It doesn't happen like that because you don't have the skills. We haven't done everything that is necessary to deal with the fact that the manufacturing of tomorrow is not going to be like the manufacturing of 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. We got to solve the skills gap. We're not going to solve it through perceived easy political fixes. And so I think we've done a bit of damage to our momentum in the last several years, because this is a global issue. And those who invest in the skills issue on a global perspective are those who win.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I was talking to one manufacturer, they were speaking about there was such a push to getting the young kids into computer science, right? And all of those trades just sort of fell off the wayside. The trades weren't sexy enough, right? They all went into computer science, and now we do have this big, huge skills gap in manufacturing.
Yeah, and even that, I mean, I would often tell the story on stage about a fellow came into our home, an HVAC contractor, heating, ventilation, air conditioning contractor, to install my original internet thermostat. It was like 2006, one of the first IP-enabled thermostats. And, he looked at it and he's, well, I can do the wiring into the furnace and the air conditioner, but this Ethernet stuff, I have no idea what to do. And I remember saying, well, that's okay. My 12-year-old will do it. And he did. You think about that HVAC contractor, he or she now needs to know more knowledge than ever before to deal with the fact that their products have become intelligent. So all this stuff, all of these trends come together, skills, IT, trades, it's all part of the same process. And so that's why I think there's guys like me, a futurist, because we're helping to paint the path as to what you really need to do to align to this future.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well said. And I guess maybe we should go on to what we're talking about, or we're talking about during the COVID. So, I guess we're still talking, right?
My life was grand. Your life is grand. And then, like COVID hit and whoa,
are you able to play golf yet? That's the important question.
Yeah. Here's what I did. I mean, I had to virtualize. I knew within a week that I was not going back on the big glorious stages in Las Vegas. So I, built this big, complicated green screen studio with like 13 lights and 8 cameras. And I actually ended up doing, a fair bit of business down here last year, talking in the world of healthcare, talking in the world of manufacturing, keynotes, virtual. And had a good gig going on for a while. Now everybody's sick of it. Everybody wants to get back to in-person events, and I'm actually, getting bookings into the fall to go back on, big glorious stages. But through the pandemic, doing these virtual talks, I was giving a lot of thought to, how are industries changing? So again, I was brought into agriculture, I was brought into healthcare, I was brought into, a whole variety of different organizations. And manufacturing was one of them. And so in this virtual world where I'm in this, tiny little box, here's what I saw happening. We obviously were shifting from what I call just-in-time inventory to just-in-case. Supply chains were so messed up, and this rush to e-commerce, and we all had to operate at such a speed, it was staggering. And look, I golf with a guy, he's a buyer for Walmart, and they're painting hardware division. And he said, look, we just source product. We get product wherever the heck we can, because everything we knew about where we got product has gone out the window. So it's sort of like just in case. I think that was a big shift. And that was all part of supply chain volatility. I think every single manufacturing executive just had to manage this massive new volatility that was never a part of that world. And with that came price inflation, which is, still part of what we're wrestling with. And a continual increase in the price of the raw materials for our supply chain. I think one of the coolest things, that happened through the pandemic, number 4, was we saw a lot of manufacturing organizations suddenly shift to new methodologies. So if you think about what happened in March and April of 2020, we had manufacturing companies who were suddenly utilizing their unused 3D printing, technology, which they had tried out to print masks and nasal swabs and surgical masks and face shields. We saw such a rush of manufacturing companies suddenly pursuing these new methodologies to build critical healthcare stuff. And I think what happened there is a lot of CEOs went, whoa, like this 3D printing stuff is very real. Manufacturing companies had to suddenly accelerate their adoption of robotics, because, we had to put in place a lot of physical distancing in the plant, and robotics, getting them outside of the cage, utilizing these advanced robotics, which have fewer safety risks as we tried to deal with social distancing things. That became a huge issue. We saw a lot of need for, let's call it, acceleration of production visibility issues. You know, that our supply chains are busted and we got to manage cost, and it's very complicated. We need really good insight into what we're doing to manage our entire process. One of the most fascinating trends was sudden new demand volatility. You couldn't buy a bicycle for the life of you. I tried to score some kettlebells last year as I was building my home gym. And I mean, that was like, not that I ever did it, but it's probably like, you know, scoring drugs in the 70s. Whoa, I got kettlebells. I mean, you think about, there was suddenly this new demand for products, and companies that were in those in-demand industries were suddenly dealing with new issues they never had to deal with before. I witnessed throughout the manufacturing sector, you know, a greater focus on cost management. How do we manage these costs? Because nothing makes sense anymore, and people are working at home, and we've got, you know, the safety issues and distancing issues and price inflation of raw materials. We really need to nail down the cost issue. Throughout every single aspect of the supply chain to the consumer, you think about all the new external partnerships that we saw as a result of e-commerce, people shopping at home, and there was a lot more direct to consumer, and all of a sudden we need partners to manage the logistics, to manage the last mile, to interface with Amazon, to you know, help us build a direct to consumer e-commerce site. I think a lot of manufacturing companies suddenly had to pursue new partnerships they never had to do before. And then through all this, it's really kind of cool that a lot of the big trends that guys like me were talking about pre-pandemic, which, whether it's electric cars and batteries or autonomous vehicles or renewable solar wind technology, it's I don't know what happened, but it's almost like the pandemic accelerated all of these trends and made them faster. And so where we find ourselves, we had these trends pre-pandemic, and then like everything went wonky, and all of a sudden we're dealing with new issues. And I think organizations really learned a lot of very, very unique stuff along the way.
Yeah, you know, and I would you agree? I mean, the previous, what you were talking pre-COVID, I mean, none of that truly went away, right? It's the focus has kind of shifted. I'm sure all of that becomes, this is almost a compound effect, would you say?
Yeah, I think what happened was we were all just in survival mode. I mean, we had to get through this thing. We had to virtualize our workforce, and we had to learn how to work at a different, you know, level of speed, because if we were talking about a world that was fast before, all of a sudden, wow, now it's like crazy fast. So I think, you know, we've spent the last 14 months simply doing what we needed to do to get by, but all of the previous trends really never went away.
Yeah. You know, and something that really resonated with me, I think it was your number 8. I guess it falls into a few different, but the greater focus on cost management. I mean, when you have companies that are scared out of their minds, right? They're looking at their own survival, and they're furloughing certain, you know, employees. And so they're this whole, you know, manufacturing forever has had this do more with less kind of mentality in you know, to an extent. But now what I've seen come out of it as we speak with some of our manufacturing customers, it's, hey, you know what? There's so much data right there available to us to help us make better decisions, to help us do more with less, maybe repurpose. They're hiring back some of their furloughed employees. And now they're really smart about where they're focusing their time, their investments. And a lot of it seems to have been on leveraging data and managing the processes around what they actually make.
Yeah, I think something, I'd agree with that. I think something really magical happened through the pandemic. Like all the, I'm not just a futurist. I talk a lot about innovation and the innovation mindset. And I mean, I've got a list of what I call the innovation killers, the excuses we make. You can't do that because we've always done it this way. It won't work. It's a dumb idea. The boss won't go for it. It's doomed to fail. And I think a lot of that went away with the pandemic simply because we had to move fast. I talked about a trend, I call it aggressive indecision. Companies, you know, couldn't make decisions, and we were aggressively indecisive. Well, that went away because like we had to make fast decisions. I think what occurred, it wasn't just these trends, but we had a massive leadership and cultural change within organizations. And I've actually got entire lists and videos on my website where I talk about what that cultural change is. And, you know, one of the trends I talk about is we We witnessed the disappearance of committees. You think about it, we used to like organize a meeting, we'd organize a committee who would go away and study it and, you know, come back 2 months later with a recommendation, and we'd have another committee meeting to talk about. Well, that didn't happen with the pandemic. We all jumped onto a Zoom call. We've got this issue, let's tackle it and let's make a decision in the next 10 minutes because we don't have time. So I think part and parcel of what has occurred is a massive cultural change and leadership style change. And I don't think we're going back. And if you didn't undergo that type of change in your manufacturing company and your competitors did, you're suddenly falling behind. And all of that flowed into the cost issue because look, for freight, you know, we suddenly had to hire, you know, cargo jets to move product because supply chains were broken, and cost escalation. I mean, I golfed with one lady and she actually had to charter the AN225, the largest, you know, freighter plane in the world, to bring some products into Toronto, Canada, where I'm based. And like, that's not cheap to do. So yeah, cost management became a massive issue going forward.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of the negative talk and the negative impact that we had on the manufacturers, we also saw some complete opposites, right? We saw companies. I was working with a company who made disposable wipes, and they just couldn't make them fast enough. So they saw a huge uptick in their business. They ended up having to, they couldn't even figure out how to revamp their current facilities to manufacture enough. They ended up breaking ground on a new facility just to keep up with demand.
Yeah, and that's the type of thing I think we've learned. I think, you know, organizations like that are now sitting back going, whoa, like 2019 seems kind of quaint because we were really slow, and we've discovered speed. We've discovered the power of speed. We've discovered the benefit of speed. And now the big issue is, how do we keep doing that? And so I think this, you know, on the other side of this thing, as we come out into this different world, it's a whole new ballgame.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and before we get into the last set of 10 is what we're talking about. We'll continue to talk about, you know, after the pandemic. I do want to give you a plug. I mean, so you talked about your website, and there are so many phenomenal resources up there, Jim. So jimcarroll.com, and also check out his books. I've had the opportunity. I saw you 6-7 years ago, I think, at a keynote in Philadelphia. Your keynotes are unbelievable. Your books, and one of them, the Think Big, Start Small, Scale Fast, actually is a bunch of excerpts from your keynotes, right? It's very easy to consume, and it's so thought-provoking and powerful, just in the format that you even wrote it in. So please, if everybody, I suggest checking out jimcarroll.com and take a look at the books.
Thank you. And you know what, like, that book came out in January 2020, 2 weeks before the pandemic really settled in. So it kind of sank like a stone. But actually, I got another new one coming out in a couple of weeks, which is all about, I spoke to a lot of people about what they were doing to reinvent through the process. And that's a big part of the future, is reinvention. You know, now we've got to reinvent for the other side.
Well, Jason, it's cliffhanger time. We seem to have run out of time, and we'll have to break this into 2 episodes.
Yeah, wow, that was great. Certain our listeners are anxious to hear Jim's final top 10, where we'll talk about the post-COVID trends of manufacturing.
Yes. Join us on the next episode. We'll go through that and some final thoughts.